My name is Alexis Jacobs. I live in upstate New York. We just recently moved out to Athens to be a little closer to family. And I have three children, but I have two children who have had adrenal cancer. So we have Noah, who is 4, and Scotty, who just turned 3. And then we have a little baby, Madison, and she's 10 months. Initially, I had two very healthy children. Scotty was diagnosed first. He was 19 months old. And at the time, his brother Noah was 2. And I just had my two healthy toddlers. And I remember when Noah, my oldest, was first born, I thought to myself, I am prepared for a child who may break a bone or who may need stitches or all of the things that come with being a boy mom. I mentally prepared and would tear up just thinking about the day that that may happen. And I thought to myself, but just don't give my kids cancer. Please, God, just don't. That's anything but cancer. And so when Scotty was around 19 months old, this is May of 2023, I felt what felt like a little ball on his testicle, on his right testicle. And I'm a female, so I sort of brushed it off at first, and it felt like the size of a pea initially. Fast forward 2 months later, it felt like more of a marble. So I brought him to our local hospital in York, Maine, where they completely brushed it off, which to me is actually mind blowing now in my journey. That they wouldn't have just even ultrasounded it or, just recommended a follow up with pediatrician. They completely said, I don't feel anything. And I followed up at my pediatrician's after with Scotty, and he actually got sick when he was supposed to be brought into that first doctor's appointment. So it was, we're after COVID, and they wanted to wait until he felt a little better. So really, 2 months after I brought him to the ER is when I got him into his pediatrician's office. And I was just nonchalantly telling her about how I felt this little lump. I never thought cancer. Not in my wildest dreams did I think cancer. I actually felt like cancer is a thing you talk about, but it's not real because I never knew anyone with cancer. I didn't really understand it. And I also thought that if someone got cancer in 2023, they just get treated and they're fine. Like I had no idea anything about this world. But when my pediatrician, who is a mother of 3, looked at me and said, I would be worried, I all of a sudden became worried and I couldn't stop fixating on it. So she initially sent us to an endocrinologist who convinced me that he thought it was some sort of early puberty happening with Scotty, that there was really nothing to be worried about. And he said, let's wait a couple of weeks for blood work to come back. I call him about a week later, and I'll never forget this. And I left a little review on his page. He had told me that he thought I should speak to someone about my anxiety that I was dealing with. Essentially, told me to talk to a therapist. That I'm, probably being a little more dramatic. And I went back. I immediately called my pediatrician. I said, "This is not. I'm not getting the right feelings from him. I don't think he's being taken seriously." She said, "He didn't do an ultrasound." I said, "No." So immediately that night, she sent us back to the hospital with an ultrasound. Um, and the tech who did the ultrasound was not allowed to really go into what his thoughts are. He gave me a hug at the end of that. And he said, "You're very strong." And I thought to myself, oh, well, they're very kind here. And then I went about my way and I thought, for sure, if he was concerned, I would have, like, it just over my head, all of these little things were. And so it was about 4 or 5 o'clock that night. And I was talking to a friend. I said, well, I haven't heard from them. It's the end of the business day. This was serious. I would have heard for them by now. So I actually put it in the back burner and went about my night. And around 6 p.m., I got a call with my doctor's, my son's doctor, an oncology team from Boston, the genetics counselors, and they're like, we found what looks to be a malignant tumor. We can't be for sure, but we have our concerns based off of how the tumor looked. And so first thing the next morning brought us into Boston, and they did a follow-up ultrasound. Now this one was a little more in depth. They actually did from the abdomen down, and they kept going over my son's right adrenal gland. And I looked at my husband and I'm like, do you like, she stepped out of the room at that point. I'm like, this is strange. And when they came back, she had another tech with her, and they explained that they found another tumor on his adrenal gland. And I just collapsed. And I actually still didn't grasp how what that meant, that the tumor had, the cancer spread. It was in 2 places, that it probably had been in the bloodstream at that. Like, I didn't grasp still how bad it was. I didn't know it was adrenal cancer, and so that's sort of when my world turned upside down. They booked him shortly after to get they weren't sure if they were going to take out just the testicular tumor or just the adrenal, but they thought, let's get it all done with at once. And thank God they did. They successfully resected those. We had to wait a week. It was a nightmare, as you can imagine, as individuals who've gone through this process. That was, I think, the waiting is the hardest because you don't know what you're getting yourself into. And they did a conference call with us. Thank God. I thought about this. Had they had made us drive out to Boston, which is about 2 hours away from where we were living in Maine at that time, I thought, I don't know how I would have driven home with that news. So they video chatted us. They explained what the cancer is and told us not to do any Googling, and that they were thinking chemotherapy is the route that they were going to take. Scotty's situation was very rare. They had never, even Dr. Ribeiro had never met anyone who was the ACC expert for pediatric cancer, I should say, but even he had never really seen that, and that was terrifying for me. They couldn't really explain why it was in the testicle and the adrenal gland. From how it was explained to me, there's no direct path. They think it may have been in utero, more likely than it had, spreading naturally later on. We'll never really know. So they weren't sure how to treat it. They weren't sure what stage it was. Stage 1, it's 2 separate occurrences. Was it stage 4? But they couldn't really explain how it missed the liver, the lungs, the spine, other areas. But in my mind, I'm not religious. I said, this is a sign from God, because God allowed me to find this tumor on my son's testicle very early on. They decided to do genetic testing on our family, which again, thank goodness they did. We found out that Scotty had Leaf-Fermini syndrome. And at first, the genetic counselor when she called me to give me those results, she said, no, you may need to take this in and it may be difficult for you to accept. I said, no, I'm happy we have an answer as to why my son got this cancer, where it stemmed from, and now we can surveil. But it didn't occur to me that his brother may have it and that my husband would have it, and which turned out to be the case. And I know we talked in depth about that. And thank you again for sort of being there for me, because I was a wreck when I found out that Noah had it. And I remember family could not understand. They're like, Alexis, it's just, you found out Noah has Leaf-Fermini syndrome. You just monitor. And when we went in for Noah's scan, the tech, I remember their demeanor in the beginning and in the end and how different it is. And when she came out to personally give my family a hug, I said to my husband, Scott, I remember the last hug I got. This is strange. So I called Boston Children's later on that night, and I said, something is not sitting right with me. And they said, well, we'll give you a call back as soon as we have more information. And so sure enough, Noah had, I think it was about a 4 by 4 centimeter mass on his right adrenal gland. And they said, we can't say for certain it's adrenal cancer, but we do know that there's a mass there, and with a history of Leaf-Fermini syndrome and adrenal cancer and your younger son, we are going to say that it potentially is. I think I called you Hope right away, actually, after that. And it was, that's how we found out how they were diagnosed. Scotty started treatment May of 2023, and that was at Boston Children's Hospital. And they really followed the guidelines. And I should have gotten the study, but Dr. Ribeiro had a study along with many other doctors actually out there, because Boston Children's were not very familiar with adrenal cancer whatsoever. I, at this time, had no idea about ACC experts or anything really about this cancer. And so I know that it took them a little while to get Scotty's chemo regimen down. They didn't really know who to talk to. It was not something they'd really seen. And so they were working with Dr. Ribeiro behind the scenes. And I didn't realize that, to go over what Scotty's treatment would look like. And they decided they were going to do EDP, etoposide, doxorubin, and cisplatin, I believe. My goodness, I just finished chemo for Noah, and I feel like it's already leaving my mind. So they did EDP chemo with mitotane. Scotty, the goal, they wanted to do 6 months, but depending on how well he tolerated it, there was the potential to go to 8 months with the EDP. With mitotane, they actually wanted to extend that 6 months out from when treatment ended. And as a lot of people in this community know, people struggle with tolerating mitotane. And so it's really dependent on how Scotty handled the mitotane was how long, that in addition to did he get to therapeutic levels, there was so many unknowns. And even with talking with the pediatric experts, they were straightforward with being honest on how rare this cancer is and how little they knew about mitotane with pediatrics. And so um, it was sort of a guessing game and chatting back and forth, but we started EDP chemo in May for Scotty, and we finished a week before his second birthday, which was just the biggest gift ever. And he handled chemo like a champ. He did 3 days inpatient, and 2 days he was able to travel back and forth to do that. And then you'd get sick, you'd spike a fever, and he'd land himself back in the hospital. I think maybe twice. But he was done treatment in about 6 months. He then did mitotane. I think he only lasted 3 or 4 months after before he got to toxic levels with the mitotane, and they had to taper it down. And some other levels were affected and impacted by that. So his thyroid was affected by the mitotane. And then Noah was a little bit different. So we found out about him in September of 2023. He started chemo. It was EDP as well with mitotane immediately. However, and he was also treated at Boston Children's, following Dr. Ribeiro and his recommendations as well. Noah's tumor ruptured before surgery, is what we were being told. So initially, if he just had that independent tumor, it would have been resected and monitored. But because it ruptured, it was progressed to stage 3, and we really had to treat it aggressively. So Noah, stage 1, his tumor ruptured at some point before surgery began. So now we have to do EDP chemo, similar to Scotty. They were going to do the same regimen. If he tolerated 8 months, we would do 8 months of EDP. But Noah barely made it through his 6 months of EDP chemo. He was super sick. The mitotane was sort of like the punch to the gut on top of it. He basically remained in the hospital. I mean, from September to February, he was in Boston Children's Hospital, extremely sick. I mean, critically ill. There were times, and Hope, you and I talked about this too, where it's like, is it worth, what do we do? Is it worth it? My son was so sick. They tapered back the chemo so it wasn't so strong, but Noah had lost over 20 pounds in that time frame. He was almost 30 pounds by the time treatment ended, and he started at almost 55. I mean, it was devastating. And the mitotane was sort of what they really wanted to keep going with, but Noah was just too sick. And even the experts really weren't sure. They said it's a toss in the air with how this is going to play out. So we did the 6 months of EDP chemo, and we did mitotane for about a month after. And we were talking about the pros and the cons with our oncology team and Ribeiro. And because there wasn't enough studies to prove that it was worth it, we wanted to see Noah healthy. And so the boys, both Scotty and Noah, had clear scans. And at that point, we decided, you know what, we're going to stop and we're going to see how this is working out. Scotty and Noah have both been clear since, Scotty's been clear since May 2023. And Noah has been clear since his surgery in September of 2023. And so that's where they stand currently. And we're hoping to keep it that way. I wish I had known early on that people do survive and that their journeys are not linear, that their journeys are tough. Some of them are scary, and you can survive it. You can have it reoccur and you can survive. I wish I knew that there were long-term survivors. And again, that it didn't always look perfect, that they didn't just survive, that it did come back. And there was some fighting that had to be done and tweaking different treatments. But I think now that's why it's so important for people like you, Melinda, myself, to whenever there's someone in a similar circumstance, or like Melinda, you will tag me when you see other pediatric parents out there or a situation similar to mine or in my area, and you're quick to be like, hey, let me connect you to this person. That is super important. And it stinks that as patients, we've had to take that initiative. From what I was told at Boston Children's, they've had other kids who had ACC. However, they didn't have it where they needed treatment. They were able to successfully resect. And so they hadn't gone through the whole EDP chemo with mitotane. And I remember we started chemo for Scotty. We knew that was very important, but we also knew Mitotane was that other key. And my husband and I felt very strongly based off of what Dr. Riviero and other members of the ACC community had said. They expressed how important it was going to be to have Mitotane. The doctors could not figure out where to get it. It needed to be compounded because, at the time Scotty had an NG2. He was 19 months old. He was not going to swallow this pill. He wasn't going to eat it. And we needed to get it in him. And it was, I mean, Scotty went through his first full cycle of chemo and they could not figure it out. And I remember going online, I asked the ACC Facebook group, and you finally, I said, well, where do you guys get it? And you told me about the compounding pharmacy. And I gave the oncology team that information, and they took it and we had it. Of course, they had to go through insurance and all that stuff, but we had it within weeks after. Probably in 2 weeks, we were able to start it. And that's when I learned about how important it was to advocate for yourself, because they did not, I know their job is to treat and take care of the kids, but I had that fire for my kid and I knew I was going to get him that if anything. I think being a pediatric parent in general, it's at first I felt guilty that it wasn't me. And then I'm asking all of these other people who actually had adrenal cancer, and then wondering, do they think that maybe it's not as serious for me? Like it was agonizing. It was extremely agonizing. I lost my job. My husband lost his job. We had to beg people to help us with GoFundMe. I mean, it was embarrassing. It was one of the lowest times of my life. And then on top of that, you're really in the back of your mind, you have to keep this brave face. But I was afraid every day about, is this going to be the last, this was my kid, the last Christmas, the last birthday, like, and you lived your life like it was going to be. But I think that I the world looked so different to me. I was sad everywhere I went. I was sad at the playground. I was just devastated. I found videos of myself where my face was just flush red in pictures with my kids because I was trying to capture those moments, but I was terrified. I think that just being a mom of two children, on top of that, I say to myself, why? Because we go in and we prepare for two scan results, and so it is just the most overwhelming. I think getting out of treatment, though, it's not as suffocating of a feeling. Knowing success stories has been truly healing for me, and then preparing myself that, okay, whichever road we take, I'm ready for this. And we are going to continue to fight. And it doesn't mean it has to be the end. But I think that our role as the caregiver, it's hard, and it's hard. And I think with Noah, especially, he was so sick. I really watched him suffer for such a long period of time that towards the end, I remember thinking, I want to rip him off these wires and just take him away, just run away from him, with him, and say goodbye. And this will never, this is just pretend it wasn't a thing. You can't. It's almost like you have a scary monster that's in your back pocket. It's super glued to you, and you don't know what he's gonna do. And I just, like, you can't run away from it. I just felt like therapy wasn't strong enough for me. Like, when I felt comfort was when I was talking to other members of that cancer community or the ACC experts. Whenever Dr. Ribeiro would call me or email me or video chat me, those were the only things that healed my soul. This community has really given me the strength I needed to feel like I can get through these things. So I wish that there was more of a community within our own cancer centers for this type of cancer. So I remember thinking, and I asked Noah's doctor, I said, if it comes back, well, what do we do? And she said, there's nothing else we can do. I will never forget that she said it to me. And then I turn around and I see, other stories and what they've done, other treatments that they've done, that there is a fight to fight. So I wish that in our own oncology teams, there was really more of a voice for this type of cancer, so that that, hey, if this doesn't work for you, don't fret. We can try this, or we can try this. When people are going into their oncology teams to talk about their cancer, they should already have some sort of established outlet. I think with adrenal cancer, again, because it is that rare cancer, it may be harder, and it's a wish. It's sort of like, wish upon a star type thing. But for me, I wasn't okay until I until I sought out these Facebook groups and met these people who we already have these Facebook chats with group members and all of these other established areas where people can you can sort of be channeled into this group. Or, you know, I think, similar to our relationship, how I was connected to you or to Melinda, you guys sort of pulled me into this other world. This is what I wish we had when I was going through this. Regardless of your journey, where it's starting is doesn't have to be where it's going to end. And I want everyone to know that you can do this. I think that I see a lot of people who come into the group and the first thing that they're saying is, I don't know what to do. I I'm at a loss. I'm terrified. Those are all those natural feelings. But I want, if I could just video chat like we're doing now, and sort of let everyone know that you're going to be okay and you're going to come out stronger, and your story is going to be the story that somebody else one day will need to hear. So continuing to share your journey and seek out others, seek out the experiences of others. I think that that is sort of what I'm seeing as a trend, but also what I think is just naturally what people should be doing is sharing your story, asking the stories of others. Don't be afraid to ask questions, direct message people. This is a very rare cancer, and we really need to hear each other's stories, their journeys, their treatments, exactly what we're discussing here. Because again, like we said, it's not linear. That we're going to come out stronger because of this, and truly, this cancer community feels like a family for that reason.